There are stories that don't need to be told in words. They live in memories, they spread through eyes. And if you listen to the end, maybe you will be the next chapter. Welcome to Darkness Tells, where darkness speaks and things that should not be remembered are told. Tonight you will hear a story that has never been told in its entirety, because every time it is told, the teller disappears. The story begins with a man named Elijah Moore, who taps into a memory that is not his, a memory that lives on, spreads, and never ends. But before we open the door to memory, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. If you don't, I may not be the narrator in the next video. It all started with a simple choice. Elijah Moore, 23, a recent college engineering graduate in Ohio, decided to leave the hustle and bustle of the city for a fresh start. A job opportunity in the sleepy town of Riverton, Indiana, opened a new path for him. Riverton is a small town forgotten by maps. There are not many people, no shopping malls, no neon lights or honking cars. There are only forests, fields, and dirt roads covered in red dust. Maybe that's why the housing prices here are also suspiciously cheap, and Elijah chose that suspicious one. A small bungalow-style house with a peeling gray wooden roof at the end of a forest road just wide enough for a car to pass. The rent is cheaper than the state minimum. Elijah doesn't believe in luck, but at the time he didn't think much of it. He just wanted peace, cheap, and a place quiet enough that no one would ask too many questions. He didn't know that some places were quiet because something was listening. The first night he entered the house, Elijah knew something was off. It wasn't the creaking of old wood or the musty smell from the basement. It was the complete absence of sound. No insects, no leaves falling, no wind. It was as if someone had turned off the entire outside world with an invisible switch. He unpacked his suitcase and arranged his things. Everything seemed normal. The kitchen was old but clean. The living room was small with only a shaggy sofa, a low wooden table, and a few scratches on the floor, like footprints dragging. The bedroom window looked out onto the dead fields, where the grass was yellow and still, frozen in time. Elijah closed the curtains, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was standing there watching him. He turned on the music on his phone to make some noise. The tune played for a few seconds, then it stopped. No signal loss, no battery, just no sound. He turned it back on, still no sound. When Elijah turned on the speaker to test it, the phone made a high-pitched noise like a muffled radio. He gasped, throwing the phone to the floor. Then it turned back on automatically, playing the right song, but in reverse. Elijah laughed stiffly. "It must be a technical problem," he whispered. But inside, fear was quietly taking root. Elijah couldn't sleep that first night in his new home. The tapping started at 2:13 a.m., a soft knock against the wall next to his bed. He turned on the light, listened quietly. Nothing. But every time the light went out, the tapping started again. Not hard, not urgent. Steady like a knock on the door, but coming from inside the wall. Elijah pressed his ear to the old wooden wall. A cold breath came from the crack, accompanied by a whisper. Not his own. He stood up, turned on the lights throughout the house. Nothing. The doors were still locked, the windows were locked. But when he stepped out into the hallway, Elijah saw it. A trail of wet footprints stretched from the front door to the middle of the living room. Not a clear pattern, just watermarks step by step, but no trace of turning back. He wiped them away with a towel. And just as he finished, a small laugh rang out, like a child's, echoing from the bedroom, where there was no one else but him. The next morning, Elijah went to the nearest gas station to ask the homeowner. The manager grinned when he learned where he'd rented it. The house down the road. You're brave. Someone stayed there for 3 weeks, then left all their stuff and left, never came back. Elijah frowned. What? They said it was at night. They heard church bells. But there's no church nearby. Elijah forced a smile, trying to brush it off as local nonsense. But that night he did hear the bells, not loud, not high-pitched, but like they were coming from underground, from the heart of the house, ringing deep, deafening. He went outside, stood in the middle of the yard, and looked around. There was nothing but the still wind and the thick darkness. But there was a figure standing in the middle of the field, an unusually tall figure, its head tilted at an odd angle, looking toward him. Elijah blinked. The figure was gone. When he returned to his room, he saw a small wooden cross placed between his pillows, something that had not been there before. He turned on the light. On the wall above his pillow was a line drawn in charcoal. "Don't let it open its eyes." Elijah backed away, his heart pounding. He ran out of the room, not daring to look back. But when he reached the front door, it had locked itself. There was no one outside, but the doorknob was bleeding. By the end of the second night, Elijah no longer thought of this as just the old house. He sat huddled in the middle of the living room, clutching the cross that he had been there for who knew how long. Everything in this house was deliberately silent. It was as if something was listening to him breathe, but not wanting to swallow him. Not yet. Not yet. Elijah closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life he whispered, "If there is someone here, I don't want to bother. I'm just passing by." But the darkness in that house didn't want him to just pass by. It wanted him to look. It wanted him to hear. And finally, it wanted him to tell. Elijah woke up feeling like he had been woken up by someone. But when he opened his eyes, all he saw was an empty room, dim sunlight filtering through the curtains, and an unnatural silence. Again. No birds, no wind. Just a black burn on the pillow, right where he had left the cross the night before. When he touched it, the cloth burned slightly in his hand as if it had been burned. There was no smell of burning, no smoke. But it was clear that someone or something had been lying there all night. His phone still had no internet connection. He turned on an offline song, but it played for a few seconds before it stopped. The screen read MUTE. Elijah squinted. No app showed any errors. He tried another song, this time a piano song without lyrics. But less than 10 seconds later, the sound was distorted into a child's laughter, a soft chuckle, a squeal. He threw the phone on the table in shock. The screen went black. A shadow passed through the living room window, but when Elijah rushed to look outside, there was no one there. He tried to concentrate, wash his face, and make coffee. But the coffee maker turned on automatically even though it was not plugged in. Drops of coffee fell into the cup, as regular as the tapping last night. When he looked over at the wooden cabinet, Elijah saw someone scratching a series of numbers deep into the wood with their fingernails, 213 to 217 to 220. It was the exact time the tapping had sounded the night before. Elijah turned around, about to leave the kitchen, when he heard the tapping again, this time from the ceiling. He looked up. Silence. But the fluorescent lights flickered, and the cold wind whistled past his ears, even though the windows were still closed. That afternoon, Elijah decided to check the electrical system. He unplugged the switches, the outlets, even the fuse box. Nothing unusual. Everything was normal, except the surveillance camera suddenly turned to a single scene, 27 seconds of him sleeping. At 14 seconds, the curtains behind the bed billowed up, as if someone had walked by outside. At 18 seconds, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the frame, almost 1.5 times taller than a normal person, standing still. At 26 seconds, the figure tilted its head in an odd way, almost 90 degrees, and then the image disappeared completely. Elijah rewound. No sound, no static. The tape was suspiciously clean. That night, Elijah pulled up all the curtains, turned on all the lights, and sat in the middle of the living room. If it wanted to look at him, then let him look back at it. 2:13 a.m. The living room light bulb exploded into tiny pieces. The entire room was plunged into total darkness. Elijah turned on his flashlight. The light flickered. The opposite wall, which had been blank all day, had a face painted in ash, indistinct, but the eye sockets were black and the smile stretched up to the cheekbones. A smile not human. Underneath was a scrawled line as if written with a dusty finger. I don't sleep. I wait. Elijah backed away, bumping into the coffee table. It flipped over, making a loud noise. At that moment, the floor shook slightly. The knocking came again. Not from the wall, not from the ceiling, but from beneath his feet. Elijah tapped his heel lightly on the floor, hollow. He bent down, put his ear to it. Footsteps, clear, slow, in circles, just below the floor. He took the floor plan back from the contract folder. There was no basement. But he remembered Bernice's words and the look in the landlord's eyes when he asked about the past of the place. He put on his coat and drove to see Mr. Delson, the old owner of the house. When Elijah mentioned the basement, the old man was silent. After a while, he said, "We used to have a basement. But in 1982, someone found a small room built inside that no one knew about. There were signs, there was a burning smell, and there was dried blood on the ceiling, running up from the ground." He looked straight at Elijah and added, "We sealed it with concrete. But, if you hear it, it probably wasn't sealed long enough." That night, Elijah took a flashlight and a hammer and went down to the old shed behind him, where Mr. Delson had said there was a door to the basement. The bricks had been filled with cement. He pounded for nearly 3 hours. Finally, a pitch-black crack opened. He bent down. A cold air rushed up like an eerie breath. He shined his flashlight inside. The darkness was thick and dense. Dust was layered. At the end of the small hallway was a large mirror covered with cloth. Elijah pulled the cloth down. In the mirror, he saw himself. But behind him was a man wearing old, tattered priestly clothes, standing with his back turned. Elijah turned his head for real. No one was there. But in the mirror, the figure began to turn. There was no face, just a dark void, and blood seeping from the collar. Elijah stepped back, pulling out his flashlight. A soft voice rang out right behind him. "You opened. The ritual was not completed." He turned around. The light swept across. No one. When he returned home, he saw all the windows were open. The wind was blowing. There was no thief, no sign of a break-in. Only wet footprints drawn in a circle in the middle of the room. In the middle was the cross, broken in two. Elijah knelt down to pick it up. His hands were covered in liquid, blood, fresh blood. He looked up. The face painted on the wall was gone, but in the family photo hanging over the fireplace, the person in the photo's eyes had been blackened out, replaced by two hollow holes that looked exactly like the ashes from last night. Elijah sat down in the middle of the room, his heart clenched. It was no longer haunting him. It was inside him. It had pinned his eyes. It was continuing the story that had not ended since 1982. I didn't sleep, and now, neither do you. There were nights so long that it felt as if time had stopped, suspended somewhere between reality and dream. That night was one of those nights for Elijah. After all the signs, the knocking, the ash face, the broken cross, the wet footprints on the floor, Elijah knew if he wanted to understand what was really happening, he had to look at it. No hiding, no guessing. Face it. Elijah didn't sleep. He didn't dare. Something in the house had started its game, and now it seemed to be trying to push him to the limit. It was late at night, the clock striking 2:12. He sat motionless on the old sofa, clutching the flashlight in one hand, the broken cross tied with red string in the other. His breaths became labored. The air seemed thick, no longer air but a thin, stifling vapor, as if something were pouring into the room along with the darkness. 2:13. The knocking came again, but not from the floor or the ceiling, from behind the curtains. Not a hard knock, just a light tap, like fingernails tapping against window glass. Repeated, once, twice, 3 times. Elijah stood. His heart was pounding, but his hands were still clenched. Slowly, he approached the living room window, where long gray curtains hung down to the floor. The moonlight outside filtered through the thin fabric, and Elijah saw a figure standing on the other side, motionless but distinct. No head, no neck. Just a tall figure, shoulders crooked and arms hanging limply as if dislocated. He reached out, gently pulling back a corner of the curtain. Nothing. The moment he stepped back, a shadow slid across the window, this time without reflection. It was shadowless. Elijah whirled around. The curtain behind him, the one he had not pulled, was now billowing slightly. But there was no wind in the room. Then, a thin hand slowly crept out, pushing the curtain aside. Elijah held his breath. From behind the curtain, a being emerged, hunched, ashen-gray skin, eyes empty, pupilless, just two hollows and a long, open mouth. Laughing. No sound came out, but he heard the laughter in his head, like 1,000 distorted, drawn-out childish laughs. The thing stepped toward him, without a sound. Elijah raised the cross. "Back!" he shouted. But his throat was dry, his voice was lost. The being did not back away, but stopped, tilted his head, and said in a voice that was not human, "This doesn't work." Then it raised its hand, pointed at the cross he was holding. The cross crumbled in Elijah's palm. No more weapons, no more prayers, only the primal fear. Elijah ran to the second floor, where nothing had happened before. He locked the door, pushed the cabinet back. But when he turned back, the mirror in the room had been drawn in a circle of blood by someone. Right inside the circle was a pair of eyes, looking at him from inside the mirror. He screamed. But no sound came out, no scream, no crash, only absolute silence. And then the mirror slowly cracked, line by line, branch by branch, as if the thing inside was trying to escape. Elijah rushed out of the room, ran downstairs, opened the main door. The door was no longer locked. Outside was Bernice, standing on the steps, holding an embroidered cloth and a small wooden statue. She was not surprised to see Elijah trembling, his face pale. She simply said, "You saw it. It saw you. Now, there is only one way." They entered the house. Bernice sprinkled salt around the door, burning a deep red incense. She placed the statue on the table, the same shape as the being Elijah had seen, but without a face. She called it the Forgotten One. "This thing doesn't want to kill you, Elijah. It wants you to remember, and then tell it, send it, make it stronger." Elijah asked, "What did I do wrong?" Bernice looked at him for a long time, then answered with a sentence that made his heart freeze. "Maybe you are the reincarnation of the one who called it out the first time." The wind howled, the windows shook, the panes of glass exploded all at once. A laugh rang out, not just in Elijah's head this time. It echoed throughout the house. Bernice stood up shouting, "I call your name! I am the gatekeeper, the blood that stops the flow, the root that stops the branches. Back off." The house shook as if there was an earthquake. The walls cracked, the mirror in Elijah's room shattered, and in an instant, from the shards, a face crawled out. But it was not the face Elijah had seen. It was his own face. Blood was flowing from her eyes. Her mouth was wide open, speechless, but her expression was pure despair. Bernice collapsed. Blood was flowing from her ears. Elijah rushed to her aid. She only had time to say, "Don't tell." Even if anyone asks, "Don't tell, let it sleep." Then she was silent forever. Elijah looked up, seeing that the creature was no longer in the house, but on every wall, on every surface, there were words written, as if written by the same hand. "I have seen, I have known. Now I will tell you." Elijah had survived that night, but he was no longer the Elijah of yesterday. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a different figure, back. Every time he slept, he dreamed of a burning house, with voices calling his name in a language that was not of this world. He knew one thing: it no longer needed a house, no physical place. It just needed someone to tell it to. And now, it had him. After the night Elijah first saw it, That hollow thing with a face like suffocating fear. He knew there was no going back. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't sleep. And worst of all, he couldn't leave the house, even if he tried. From the moment Bernice collapsed, blood pouring from her ears, her eyes wide open in unconsciousness, everything in the house had gone wrong. The air had changed. The gravity had shifted. Even the light no longer reflected the way it did. Elijah felt like he was living inside some kind of ghostly simulation where every step, every glance was recorded by it. He tried to leave Riverton the next morning. The car started, the wheels rolled, the engine roared. But when he reached the end of the forest road, the only way out, the road had disappeared. Not blocked, just not there, as if the world outside the house had been removed. Returning in silence, Elijah sat motionless in the cold kitchen. On the table was the wooden statue of the Forgotten One that Bernice had brought with her. He looked at it, and for the first time he noticed the back of the statue was not carved, as if it were unfinished. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that the rest was being carved with the story he was continuing to live? At night, Elijah was awakened by a soft groan, not a human voice. He walked out of the room, following the sound to the back door of the house. In front of the door, a thin, razor-edged blood trail stretched across the ground, leading straight to the corner of the yard where the door to the old basement was. He remembered clearly that basement door had been plastered over 40 years ago, and yet it was open now. Elijah took his flashlight, his old dagger, and the diary that Bernice had left behind. He walked down the rotten wooden stairs. The air below was as thick as ash. Every breath was a forced effort. The basement no longer looked like the blueprint. It was deeper. Below was a stone hallway, the walls covered with long-dried, blood-stained clothes, and inscriptions written in characters Elijah had never seen. The flashlight flickered. Sometimes it went out without reason. Then he saw the stone door, sealed with rusted chains, but still warm as if it had been recently removed. On the door were engraved the words in Latin, Qui meminit liberabit. He who remembers shall be freed. Elijah placed his hand on the door. It was as cold as a dead man's hand. But as soon as he touched it, a sting shot from his hand to the top of his head, accompanied by a series of disturbing images. Ritual, blood, screaming children, a burning priest, a burning circle of fire. Elijah collapsed. But the door opened. Inside was a circular room. The walls were tiled with ancient tiles. The vaulted ceiling was carved with strange symbols like bleeding eyes. In the center of the room was a black stone pedestal on which sat an ancient book bound in iron chains. He approached. The book had no title. There was only a symbol, a faceless figure sitting in a circle of eyes. Elijah picked up Bernice's diary to examine. One page read, "If he is ever called again, the book will appear, not to be read, but to find someone to tell the story. Remember, he does not eat souls, he eats memories." Elijah opened the book. The first page was blank. Then the words appeared, each stroke as if written in fresh blood. Elijah Moore, the one with the blood of Marlene, the first summoner. Elijah froze. He had never heard the name Marlene. Then a voice, gender indistinct, spoke behind him. "Marlene was your great-grandfather, the first to open the blood door in 1903, and now you are the heir." He turned. Before him stood a man in ancient priestly robes, his face hidden by a white mask with no eyes or mouth. But the voice came as if from inside Elijah's head. "We don't summon demons, we summon memories. We create things that cannot be forgotten. And now, Elijah, it's time for you to remember." The man's hand touched Elijah's forehead, and in an instant the entire past, fragments of memories that had never existed in his mind, flooded back like a flood. He saw himself, not Elijah, but a silver-haired man standing in the middle of a ritual with 7 bound children. He was speaking in an ancient language, summoning something from beyond this world. Then a giant red eye opened in midair, and black smoke sucked the souls of each child. And then everything collapsed. Elijah fell to the cold stone floor. He woke up in the same basement, but there was no one. The book was still on the table, open to the last page. The second narrator remembers. Now the story can continue, the memory is extended, and the entity enters again. From the darkness, a creature nearly as tall as the ceiling stepped out. No face, no mouth, but the eyes all over its body, red, yellow, purple, flickered like candles being swept by the wind. It stepped closer. Elijah trembled. But instead of killing him, it just bent down, placed a finger on his heart, and disappeared into the darkness as if it had never been there. On Elijah's chest, a scorched mark, a circle of eyes. He staggered back to the ground. As he stepped out of the basement, sunlight returned for the first time in days. But he knew it wasn't the house that had really changed. It was him. Elijah Moore returned from the basement with something in his chest, not fear, not guilt, but something he couldn't name. The brand of fire on his skin didn't hurt, but it throbbed with his heart as if it had a life of its own. And then, that night, Elijah began to dream. No longer a nightmare like before, but a vivid, terrifyingly detailed memory of a life that wasn't his. He saw himself in his monk's robes, walking through the black stone corridors of a church. Under his feet was a tapestry embroidered with human skin, the tile floor dripping with blood. He held an ancient scripture speaking a language he had never learned. Outside, hundreds of people in white knelt, murmuring prayers. When Elijah woke, he couldn't breathe. It felt like something was sitting on his chest, squeezing out every last cell of air. He jumped up, fell off the bed, and clutched his chest. On the palm of his right hand, Latin words appeared as if engraved in fresh blood. Libera memoriam, reda figuram. Release the memory, return the form. He blinked, the words faded and disappeared, but the feeling remained, as if the memory had not gone but was just sleeping. For 3 nights in a row, Elijah experienced the same dreams. He was no longer Elijah. He was Marlene, the first summoner. He ordered sacrifices. He bled the living. He sang the prayer backwards in a baby's voice. The more he dreamed, the more he lost his memory when he woke up. He could no longer remember his mother's name. He forgot his birthday, and in a moment of washing his face, when he looked in the mirror, he did not recognize himself. Elijah began to write everything down in a notebook to fight against the erasure of memory. He wrote in block letters, "I am Elijah Moore, I am not Marlene." But the next morning, someone had scratched out the words, and in their place was this, A-M-B-A-C-K. His body began to change, too. The veins under his skin turned black, standing out like dead branches. His eyes were constantly red and swollen, and the scent around him was no longer that of a living person. The townspeople began to avoid him. The mailman stopped knocking on his door. Children ran past his house, whispering to each other, "He has 2 shadows." Elijah tried looking in the mirror during the day. He saw only himself. But when the sun went down, there was another shadow that matched his, but the heartbeat was off. The climax came on a rainy night. Elijah woke up to a whisper right next to his ear, his own voice, but strange. "Let me go back, let me finish." He stepped out into the hallway where the overhead light bulb flickered as if it were about to explode, and at that moment every light in the house went out. The house was dark, save for the sound of rain hitting the windows and laughter echoing off the walls. Not from one direction, but from all directions. Elijah gasped. He turned to go back to his room when the door slammed shut, and behind him, a long black arm slithered across the wall and rested on his shoulder. He froze, not from fear, but because the hand was so cold it stopped his blood from flowing. Then something inexplicable happened. The wall cracked, and in small cracks. A pair of giant eyes inside, not physical, not an illusion. They looked at him from the wall, from the floor, from the back of every mirror. A voice echoed, Marlene didn't finish. Let Elijah finish. Elijah screamed, broke free, and headed for the basement, as his instincts told him. The basement was dark, but the chained book was open, new pages appearing line by line. He who carries the memory becomes a symbol. He who completes the story opens the way for the entity to be incarnated. He looked down at his hand. The Latin was engraved again, this time glowing red. In a last-ditch effort, Elijah retrieved Bernice's original amulet, but the paper was rotten. The characters had been changed. On the amulet now was only a single symbol, a hand cupping a closed eye. Beneath it were the words, "Do not let your eyes open. Do not let the memory live a third time." Elijah stepped outside into the pouring rain. He walked barefoot through the muddy path into the middle of the dead field behind his house, where he had seen the headless shadow before. There was a deep pit now, and the singing echoed from the bottom of the pit. There was no rain on his shoulders, no wind. There was only an absolute silence, so quiet that Elijah could hear his heart beating out of rhythm with his own. He looked down into the pit, bottomless darkness. An old voice spoke, his great-grandfather Marlin's. "You can't stop, but you can choose how to tell it. Choose the right one, and it will sleep again." Elijah sat down on the edge of the pit. For the first time he closed his eyes, not to hide, but to remember, from himself. He wasn't Marlin, he was Elijah, but he was the descendant. And because of that blood, he couldn't break the loop, he could only direct it. When he opened his eyes, the face of the Forgotten One was before him, now fading, dissolving into the air like ash. It looked at him with eyes that had no black pupils, no threat, no anger, just waiting. Elijah whispered, "I will tell you." But in my own way, and in that moment, the lightning tore across the sky. The entity was gone, but the rain remained, washing away everything except the mark on Elijah's chest, now glowing dimly like a firefly under his skin. After the rainy night, when Elijah thought he had closed a terrifying chapter, he realized it was just the beginning. The entity, the Forgotten One, was not defeated. It had only retreated. Like a musician who had put down his instrument, waiting for the end to play the finale, its music had not stopped. And then the next morning, when Elijah opened his window for the first time in weeks, an envelope appeared on the sill. No one had given it to him. No one had seen it. But it was there, pure white. The edges were slightly dark, as if licked by ash. Inside, a single line, written in a dull black ink, unblemished, unscented. "We had dreams too." That night Elijah lay awake, trying to stay awake. But at exactly 3:13 a.m., the kitchen window opened again, even though he had locked it from the inside. This time a piece of paper fell to the floor, as if it had been stuffed from the space outside the glass. "We see doors." No signature, no sender. And the strangest thing, each letter was written in a different language: ancient Latin, Sanskrit, ancient Chinese, binary code, and once just interlocking circles, like a map of a dream corridor. Elijah began to understand he was not the only one, and what was haunting him was not limited to Riverton. It was a living memory, and memories always needed remembering. He left the house after nearly 3 weeks of living as a ghost. His first destination was St. Harvin's Abbey in the Danforth Woods, abandoned after a mysterious fire in 1971. According to the chained book, it was the first recorded site of the dream transmission ritual. Inside the abbey was a cold stone crypt, so deep that Elijah's flashlight could not reach the bottom. The walls were carved with thousands of strange symbols, the same ones he had seen in his dreams. In the center of the crypt there was a circle of ash, and in it was placed a block of black, half-burned wood, engraved with the words, "We told the story wrong, so the dream continued." Here Elijah found a moldy diary in which was recorded the account of Isadora Thive, a former nun who burned herself to stop the dream from continuing. I dreamed that I was a man, a soldier, an executioner, a child tied up. And when I woke up, I didn't remember who I was, so I burned my body so that no one would tell me anymore. What Elijah discovered next would change him forever, a network of people with memories that did not belong to them. They called each other the memory veins. They did not live in the same place, they did not share the same religion, they did not share the same time, but they dreamed the same thing, the same door, the same singing voice from the shapeless darkness. A woman in Turkey sent him a VHS tape of herself sleeping, in which, while dreaming, she stood up and opened her mouth to sing in Old Irish, a language she had never heard before. A 10-year-old boy in Nigeria drew a circle of bleeding eyes on the wall of his house that looked exactly like a chain, without anyone ever showing it to him. A retired soldier in Quebec woke up in the middle of the night with a bleeding back, where a Latin scar had appeared. You forgot. Now remember for us. Elijah met Mira, a blind woman in Bridgewell who had seen him in his dreams years before. Though she had never met him in person, she knew his face, the mole under his left cheek, and even the fact that he had cut off his middle finger when he was 8. I saw you in my first dream when I was 6, Mira said. You are the last, and you are being re-engraved by it, like damp wood waiting for ink, like earth waiting to be buried. She handed him an object, a pendant engraved with the symbol of a bleeding eye, hollow inside. When you see blood dripping from your ear, wear it. That's when you're about to say something that isn't yours. But what made Elijah shiver the most came from his own body. One morning, looking at his hands, he saw the veins under his skin shifting, not flowing, shifting, as if something inside was trying to find a way out. And that night, as he fell asleep from exhaustion, he woke in the middle of his sleep, standing in the middle of the desert. It wasn't a dream. The sun was burning. No sound. He turned his head and saw hundreds of people standing behind him, faceless, skinless, but breathing in the same rhythm as him. A deep voice boomed, "You're the first to tell it right, so we're alive again." When Elijah woke up, his feet were covered in sand, a kind of dirt that had never been found anywhere else before. On his collar were dried beetle wings, a species that only lived in ancient Egypt. He knew the memories were no longer just dreams. They were stepping out into the physical world, and he was the portal. Since leaving the house in Riverton, Elijah Moore had not dreamed in the usual way. He did not sleep, but he did enter other dimensions, layers of memories that existed parallel to reality, woven with blood and fear and burned history. And then one night, while he was staying in an abandoned motel in the Catskill Mountains, the dream came without him closing his eyes. It hit him like an invisible storm, no warning, no choice. He sat there, cold tea in his hand, eyes on the cracked window, and suddenly the landscape melted. The walls turned to skin, the lights flickered and whispered, the floor turned to mud, and before him was the black door, the one that had appeared in every dream. This time it was not a blur. It was there, open, and waiting for him to enter. Elijah stood up. His body was no longer that of a waking man. He felt light, but not empty. His limbs moved slowly as if they were moving underwater. The door opened into a long, dark hallway, illuminated only by the phosphorescence of memories floating in the air. He saw himself, 7 years old, crying over losing his mother in the supermarket. He saw himself, 16, kissing the first girl on the bus to the country. Bernice standing in the distance, nodding sadly. But then, he saw memories that weren't his, a silver-haired child tied to an altar, a priest slashing ancient words into his skin with a flaming blade, a blind woman walking through a forest of ash, holding a beating human heart, a man laughing as he burned alive. Elijah couldn't stop staring, because with each memory a part of him cracked. He felt himself split, stretched apart with each image. When he reached the end of the hallway, Elijah saw a room, no door, no ceiling. There were only thousands of eyes, wide open on the walls, the floor, the air, and in the middle of the room was the forgotten one. No longer a shadowy figure, no longer a voice. It had a form, and it was waiting. The being was twice as tall as a man. Its skin was damp ash mixed with old blood, and it smelled of rusted metal. Instead of a face, there was a white mask. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only a small crescent-shaped slit from which a dark liquid oozed. But beneath the mask, something was moving. On its back grew arms, adults, babies, stumps, clawed hands. Each arm held an object, a stopped watch, an old keychain, a burned photograph, a torn Bible, and a map made of human skin. Elijah stood still. He couldn't speak. And then the being spoke, Elijah's voice. I am you, when you no longer remember who you are. I am all the memories you have forgotten, erased, and never wanted to remember. I have not come to take, I have come to return. Elijah stepped back. I am not the summoner. I am not Marlin. The entity nodded, not angrily, not threateningly. Marlin is my hand, you are my mind. The one before was my ear, the one after will be my eye. There was a pause. Then the entity continued. You have dreamed long enough. Now, dream again when you are awake. The room dissolved. Elijah fell, gravityless, endless. He fell through scenes, like sliding through dead time, a city in ash, people dancing around a headless child, a crypt under the ocean where a drowned priest opened his eyes again. A man who looked exactly like Elijah was killing himself in the mirror. Then everything went black. He woke up in the middle of a wasteland, no motel, no trace of the entity, just a circle of ash, and in the middle was Bernice's diary, with a final page added. If you have walked through the door, everything is real from now on. Remember, the entity does not need a picture, it only needs a narrator. In the days that followed, Elijah stopped eating, stopped sleeping, but I lived. He began to hear the thoughts of others, especially those who had dreamed. He went to a mental hospital in Maryland, where a 9-year-old girl had painted an eyeless, mouthless face exactly like the forgotten one. When he entered, the girl smiled and whispered, Have you told me? They are waiting. Elijah knew. If he told what he had seen, the entity would spread. But if he does not tell, it will continue to borrow the bodies of others. While wandering in the forest, Elijah meets Mira, the blind girl, who is no longer blind, but her eyes are not human. I open my eyes in time, and I see. Elijah, we are the last chapter, but the last chapter needs a narrator. Let me be the listener, and you, the teller. That night, Elijah sits in the ashes. Mira faces him. He begins to tell, but with each word he speaks, his eyes change color. His body trembles. Not painfully, but as if transforming. His voice is no longer his own. That story is telling itself through his mouth. And somewhere, far away, a stranger wakes up in the middle of the night, cold sweat, looks out the window, sees a man in a white mask standing in the A child, opens a picture book, finds a page he has never drawn. A long-time deaf person hears a whisper for the first time. The story has escaped, and Elijah, only a memory telling himself. The story has been told, but it does not stop. The memory that Elijah Moore awakened, or rather forced to tell, no longer needs dreams, rituals, or summoners. All it needs is one thing: reflection. Elijah has become the root node, the starting point where this ancient memory merges with modern reality. From his body, voice, and eyes, an invisible frequency is transmitted, seeping into anything that can reflect gaze, mirrors, phone screens, security cameras, even other people's eyes. The first time the memory spreads is through a bathroom mirror in Montana. A woman is brushing her teeth when suddenly she sees her reflection move out of sync with her own. The reflection smiles, while she remains solemn. The newborn baby in her arms, its reflection in the mirror has disappeared. She screamed, dropped her toothbrush. Blood gushed from her gums. But when she turned to look in the mirror, She saw herself being burned alive. She woke up in a mental hospital. She could no longer remember her child's name, her own name, or why she was there. But she drew a bleeding eye with menstrual blood on the wall of her room and whispered every night, "He told me. Now it's my turn." In New Zealand, a group of tourists camping by Lake Te Anau took a selfie at sunset. When one of them reviewed it, he discovered there was a fourth face in the photo. No eyes, no mouth, just skin as tight as parchment, and two hands strangling himself. The other three saw nothing, but the person who took the photo suffered a retinal hemorrhage the next morning, and in his phone log he wrote, "I no longer control my gaze, my eyes are choosing where they want to look." Elijah now is hiding in an abandoned basement under a used bookstore in Boston. He has covered every reflective surface, mirrors, bottles, even the water in the sink. He writes in a diary every day, not to remember, but to check that what he remembers matches reality. Day 1, I am Elijah Moore. I am hiding. Day 2, I am Elijah. I was Moore. Day 3, I have been told. Day 4, blank page. Day 5. I don't know if anyone is actually reading this, but if they are, please stop reflecting. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, an office building's surveillance camera system is strangely down. When the staff checked the security footage, all the cameras recorded the same image: an empty hallway but with a creature crawling on the ceiling, a tall, thin body, a white mask, and eyes opening along its spine. The image from the video went viral on social media, and in just 48 hours, 15 users posted photos of themselves in mirrors, complaining about eyes looking back at them that weren't theirs. The Japanese government temporarily locked down the building but gave no official reason. In the leaked internal report, a haunting caption read, "The entity doesn't exist in reality, only in reflection, but the fear is real, and it spreads through the gaze." Elijah was haunted by Mira's words. Once the door is open, every mirror is a doorway. He realized he couldn't stop this from spreading, but it can be directed. Elijah comes to the empty cemetery in Savannah, the site of a Civil War execution. There is a stone there that is said to be incapable of reflecting a human image. He stands before it, his hands shaking, and sees himself reflected. But the image doesn't do what he does. It moves differently. Its eyes are hollow and its mouth moves slowly. "I have spread memories. You are just the beginning. Everyone who has seen you is the next one to tell." Elijah no longer believes he is an individual. He feels like he is a transmitter, where all the old dreams and forgotten images are used as antennas to amplify. And everyone who has ever encountered him, directly or indirectly through photos, mirrors, videos, is affected. A teacher in Brazil hangs himself in front of his class shouting, "I am just a draft." A nurse in France scratched her own face after finding herself smiling in the mirror while her heart had stopped. A hacker in Germany uploaded a 3-hour audio recording of a newborn baby whispering in ancient Sumerian. Elijah tried to find the place where it all began, the memory vault in a ruined monastery in Croatia, where the first mirror in history was made of mercury. When Elijah stood before the mirror, he was no longer reflected. Only the face of Marlin, the first summoner, appeared, and a deep, muffled voice echoed from within the mercury. "We have made the way. You are only the last one to carry the torch, but don't forget, the torch is to guide the way, not to put out the fire." That night, Elijah wrote one last line in his diary. "If I disappear, please burn everything I look into. Mirrors, cameras, photos, because I am not me anymore." The memories had spread. Elijah Moore was no longer the center. He was just the first door to open. Now all the other doors had burst open. And then, as if fate had written in the dust, the first child born at the moment of Elijah's last reflection did not cry. In a small hospital in Nové Město, Czech Republic, in the middle of a December snowstorm, a mother named Lidie Novak gave birth to a baby boy. The doctor said the boy was healthy, his skin was pink, his heart was beating clearly. But there was one strange thing. The child's eyes did not blink, did not move, did not close, did not react to light. He just stared at the small mirror at his mother's bedside, as if he had been waiting for a long time. 3 hours later, the wall behind the hospital bed began to crack from the inside. The sound was like dry wood burning. When the nurses came to check, they found a line of words engraved in dried blood. The narrator has stopped. The host has opened his eyes. Elijah, who was hiding in the Red Monastery in Austria, suddenly felt something snap inside him, as if an invisible thread that had once bound his mind had been severed. He heard his own voice, but it was not coming from his mouth, but from somewhere outside his body. I have done my part. Now the last word lies in the child's eyes. Elijah trembled. He knew this could not be stopped, but it could be directed. And so he set out without notice, without a plan, with only one goal, to find the newborn with sleepless eyes. At the Nowe Miesto hospital, strange phenomena began to appear. The delivery room mirror automatically fogs up even without the steam. The baby's ultrasound was completely ruined, with only a black dot like a hole in the image. A nurse saw her face in the mirror, her head turned away. The head doctor decided to temporarily evacuate the patient, but just before the ambulance arrived, the lights in the entire hospital went out. In the darkness, Liddy saw her son smiling for the first time, but his mouth was not moving. Hours later, Elijah arrived. He only had to step into the hospital gate and the baby's eyes widened, pupils dilated like black holes. Liddy was holding her baby, sitting on a chair in the hallway, bathed in the reddish darkness from the spare flashlight. When she saw Elijah approaching, she simply said, "You're the one in the pictures he drew." Elijah was stunned. What did he draw? He was a baby. Liddy turned on the light on her phone, showing him the notebook she used as her mother's diary. Dozens of drawings in blue ballpoint pen were on it, scribbled but clear. A man in a white mask, a black door, a shadowless child. And Elijah, standing by the stone pedestal, blood streaming from his eyes, chanting prayers. Elijah knelt. He knew this child was not a legacy, it was a convergence. Everything that had ever been told, forgotten, burned, now converged in its single gaze, and if no one stopped it, everyone who looked into its eyes would begin to carry ancient memories. Elijah asked to hold the child. He knew this was his last moment as a teller. When their eyes met, time froze. He saw all the memories, not just his, but those of all those who had been parasitized by the forgotten one. A Persian man burned alive in a ritual. An Egyptian queen carved ancient scriptures into her belly. A Tibetan monk locked himself in a cave for 100 days to forget everything. Elijah saw it all. And then he saw himself, standing behind him. The child sighed for the first time. A black aura as light as ash smoke escaped from its mouth, swirling around Elijah. And as Elijah's eyes dimmed, he whispered, "Tell it right, this time. Let it end, never again." Then he faded into nothingness. No blood, no flesh, just a cloud of ash mixed with the snow outside the window. The child was found sleeping soundly in his mother's arms, with a red glow emanating from the middle of his forehead. No explanation. The case of Elijah Moore, an American wanted for mental illness, was closed without explanation. But in the hospital cameras, the last picture recorded was a faceless man bending over the child, and behind him, a huge legless figure just floating. That night in a kindergarten in Argentina, a little girl woke up in the middle of the night, walked to the mirror in the bathroom. She looked at herself and laughed. On her forehead, there was a red mark exactly like the child in Nowe Miesto, and in her dream that night she saw a circle of children telling a story without words. I was the last one to remember. I don't know why I still exist, when all the others, those who saw, dreamed, told, were all swallowed up in that vortex of memories. Maybe because I didn't tell. I only heard. I only remembered. I was a nurse at Nove Miesto Hospital on that night, the fateful night when the child opened his eyes without crying. I was the only one standing in the room when the mirror at the head of the bed cracked for no reason. I saw the mirror fragments fall to the tiled floor without making a sound. I read the line of blood gradually appearing from the wall behind my mother's bed. The narrator has stopped. The host has opened his eyes. I stood still, not daring to breathe loudly. At that time, I didn't understand anything. I just thought, maybe I was sleepwalking. But then that night when I got home, I couldn't see my face in the mirror. I didn't dare tell anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because something in my head whispered, if I told, I would be replaced. I didn't know what replaced meant. But I saw Mira, the blind woman I'd never met, in my dream, sitting on the stone steps of a temple, turning to face me and saying, "Memories will find the weakest to enter." I've lived quietly for more than 20 years since that night. I didn't marry, I didn't have children, I didn't keep family photos. I covered every mirror in the house, filled the sink with sand, and never looked at my face in the water. I worked like a ghost. I even avoided looking into other people's eyes for too long. Because every time the gaze lasted more than 3 seconds, I felt like I was starting to tell, not with words, but with my eyes. And then, I started to hear laughter, not from somewhere far away, but from memory, like a recording that plays back endlessly. I see Elijah, hands clasped before a circle of ashes. I see the newborn baby, eyes dilated like black holes. I see images I have never seen, but remember as if I had lived them. I know my time is running out, and I don't want that memory to use me as a starting point when I fall into a coma at the end of my life. So I write, but not with my hand. I write with my memory. I record every scene, every face, every word, not to tell, but to lock it away. One night the wind whistled through the old wooden roof. I dreamed of a man in a hospital gown, faceless but with a deep voice. I am the image. You are the echo. If you remember, the story lives. I woke up in tears, my heart pounding like a drum, and I understood. Memories don't need words, they just need someone to remember. And I was the last piece of Elijah Moore left in the world. I went to the ancient archives in Switzerland, a place that specializes in forbidden scriptures, texts of unknown origin. I handed over Elijah's diary, wrapped in red cloth and tied with blood. I left a note with it. Do not read aloud, do not tell. If you must open silently. Then I retreated to northern Italy, a small village in pine forests and fog. I lived in seclusion. No technology, no acquaintances. I planted trees. I wrote letters by hand. Every month I sent a blank letter to the old monastery, a ritual to say, I have not told. Then one day I met the children in the village. They came to play around my house, saying they dreamed of chains dragging on the ground. One said, I saw you in my dream. You were holding a mouthful of fire. I said nothing. I just tied each of them a small bag of salt and red thread around their necks. If you see anything in the mirror, don't look too closely. If you hear a voice in your head, keep it. I knew the next generation couldn't avoid that memory, but they could choose the right way to tell it. Tell it by silence. Tell it by avoidance. Tell it by not telling it. One autumn day I received an unmarked envelope. Inside was just one line. We opened the chest. But someone else saw it first. He doesn't read with his eyes. He hears with his blood. I shuddered. The loop started again. I returned to Barbados. I met Naya, now living in seclusion near Dominica. We rehearsed the final ritual, not to seal but to entrust. We carved a symbol into the stone, a closed eye behind which a extinguished flame. We left it in the center of the forest where if someone touched it and remembered, they would know when to stop. I am not young. I know soon I will no longer be able to control my thoughts. So I sit here. I write down the last line. I am the last one to remember. I choose to remain silent. But if you read this, you may be starting to remember. I close the notebook. The wind blows through the window. I look into the mirror for the first time in years and see the reflection of another person smiling. I understand. Now it's your turn. Are you looking at the screen or are you being looked at? If you've made it this far, congratulations. You're still yourself. At least, for now. But listen, did that voice just ring out behind you? Elijah Moore's story isn't just a horror story. It's a warning, a cold truth. Not everything we remember is ours. There are memories that live parasitically within us, and when told, they find their way back. See? They don't need ritual. They don't need summoning. They just need someone to tell them wrong, or someone who remembers too well. From that first glance in the mirror to a whisper you're not sure is true, to a dream you thought you'd forgotten. They can all be cracks. They don't tear open doors. They open layers of memory. And Elijah, he tried not to tell. He chose to be silent. But even silence has an echo. What about you? Will you keep quiet, or will you share this story to warn others? Because if you don't tell, your memories might tell you. The lesson? Remember this. Not everything should be told, and not everyone should hear. But if you do, at least, let the light of understanding guide you before the darkness knows your name. If you find your heart still racing after this story, hit that like button, just so I know you're still here. Subscribe to Darkness Tells now so you don't miss the next stories that might make you ask, am I dreaming, or am I living in someone else's memory? Share this video with the bravest person you know, or the most sleepwalker you know. Who knows? They might have met Elijah without even knowing it. See you in the next video if you're still yourself. Stay dark, stay aware. This is Darkness Tells,